immigration is like destroying the United States. I haven't seen these studies. If at one point
Well, what do
it's
you mean? The United States is already destroyed, so how can
how is the
something be
United States
destroying it?
already destroyed?
Well, we live in a time where essentially we live in a time of ultra feminism,
What do you mean by ultra
ultra
feminism?
liberalism, ultra
Okay, so it seemed like the ending of our discussion last time kind of rested on looking through some empirical claims that you were making, right, to verify the validity of some of your beliefs about the variation of intelligence between races of people, right? Would you agree with that?
um yes. As I remember correctly, I had given you a lot of things that you said you were interested to look into because you didn't know a lot about, and then you couldn't refute what I was saying because you didn't have the proper information, and that's where we left
Yeah.
off. Correct?
Yeah, sure. So to start with one thing, let's start with the that transracial Minnesota adoption study. So, firstly, this study was conducted. These children being adopted were born in the 1960s. This was over, I think, I want to say 130 cases, and it had nothing to do with twins, right? Just to kind of set the outset of this study. When you take a look
Okay.
at all
Yeah,
of
I think when I said twins, I was confusing it with a different study because there have been twin studies before.
Sure. So, in looking at all of this information and in looking at the researchers' own conclusions, the people that conducted the study and people that have made responses to people that have tried to draw information from the study, nothing that the actual researchers themselves said had anything to do with genetic variation between race. But it seemed like most of the opinion about the study had to do with environmental factors, especially concerning two big things. One was the prenatal environments that the black children were born in, because this was in the 1960s. A lot of these people had the potential to be somewhat malnourished or disproportionately impacted by legal segregation or other kinds of things going on at the time. And two, that a lot of the black children that were adopted in this study were adopted at a much later age than the white children, which they said they could find, having disproportionate impact on development of IQ if they were put into otherwise advantageous situations. But if you read the statements from the actual researchers themselves that conducted this study, none of these statements say that we have demonstrated that there is some sort of IQ gap between races of people. I didn't see that at all in any of the researchers' comments on this study. Do you agree or disagree with this?
Um, no, I agree, and that all it seems like that's usually is what happens. The researchers themselves will say, "Oh, it doesn't really prove anything. Whatever. This isn't what you think it is." But then there's lots of people that will come out and argue against it,
So
against what those researchers are saying it means.
So I guess I'm confused. When I ask you to cite studies that kind of prove the validity of your point, because we're looking at empirical evidence, why would you cite a study that speaks against that?
Well, the actual study doesn't speak against it. The researchers' interpretation of the study might not be the same as what I feel the proper interpretation of it should be. But the actual data doesn't
Okay,
go
so
against what
why
I'm
would I
saying.
go with your interpretation of the study over the interpretation of the people that actually did it?
Well, it's not just my interpretation. You can look at what Richard Lynn said about it. I believe if you read the Wikipedia article, even it says that Richard Lynn and a couple other people, I don't even know, I think it might have been Charles Murray, said that it proved the heritability of IQ, but or that this
So
was a significant proof of that.
Okay, so when you say heritability of IQ, so I looked up a little bit on the other website that you recommended me to read, the alternative hypothesis. Heritability of IQ doesn't speak at all. It has nothing to do with the variation of IQ in races. Heritability has nothing to do with that. And even in the alternative hypothesis website that you suggested me reading, they make that same assertion. If you Google heredity or heritability and IQ and alternative hypothesis, you can scroll to that page at the very bottom where they will even state that heritability has nothing to do with variation in IQ between races. Do you understand that?
Do you mean the gap between IQ and
Sure. Or
races?
any differences. Any differences between races and IQ and races has nothing to do with heritability.
No, I fully understand that. But the thing is, like just saying that IQ has 75 or 0.75 heritability, that doesn't prove that the differences between races are due to genetics.
Okay, so then wait, what? Then why bring up anything about the heritability of IQ here when we're talking about the difference in IQ between races?
Because you try to if you eliminate certain environmental factors, then you can draw conclusions about if it's genetic or environment that's causing the difference in intelligence or the disparity in any traits between races.
Yeah, but if you eliminate environmental factors, then you're not if environmental factors are one of the key variables influencing intelligence, then you're missing that in your data. Like if you hardcore limit environmental factors to try to draw conclusions, then sometimes you're eliminating one of the most important variables that you have to test for. This seems to be something that's talked about a lot when people are doing these kinds of controls for these types of tests. So you have to be careful that if you control for too many environmental factors, what you end up doing is you overrepresent some things in your data. I watched a 2-hour lecture on this, and the guy was bringing up a lot of this stuff, also talking about the heritability of IQ to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding any of this stuff. But so, like, for instance, like you can have the example that he used was 2 different gardens, right? You can have 2 genetically identical gardens, one growing in the desert and one growing in a lush valley, are going to have very, very different, average heights in terms of these plants. And even if the heritability of their overall plant height is 0.8, and you see a little bit of variation in the left and a little bit of variation in the right due to that heritability, you can't use the difference between those and say that, well, it's because one is so genetically different because of the heritability. Like, that's not how heritability works. Like, the environment can still have a massive impact.
Yeah, and I never claimed otherwise. I don't think I would ever claim otherwise to that statement.
Okay, gotcha. Because it sounded like when you were citing the study that you were trying to prove that this study would go a long ways in showing that black people were genetically inferior to white people in terms of intelligence. That was the understanding that I had.
Well, the point of citing it was proving that there was a genetic aspect to
Well, but how does that study
intelligence, just like there is height?
I don't know how does that study prove that there is a genetic aspect to it?
Huh? Well, it proves it in the same way that when they tested this stuff to figure out that height had a heritability of 0.8, that it showed that there was genetic aspects to it.
Well, but nobody is arguing that there's not like a genetic aspect to intelligence, or at least I don't think.
Yeah,
so.
You were the one that was just a few weeks ago saying that it was close to zero or a negligible genetic impact upon intelligence.
We're talking about the variation. I'm sorry if I said that, then I misspoke. We're talking about the variation of intelligence between groups, not necessarily whether or not it's heritable, but if the variation between groups can be explained by a genetic factor, right? Is primarily what the conversation is focused on.
Well, right, but when they found out that height was 0.8 or had about a 0.8 heritability, what they drew from that was that the differences between the populations in height, like the reason Asians even in the West are still 5 inches shorter than Europeans and blacks is because of genetic factors, not because of some discrimination.
Well, height. Well, that's a kind of a bad example because, like in North Korea, you can actually impact height pretty severely via malnutrition, even if the heritability is high.
Well, yeah, but no, that doesn't disprove anything because I said Asians in the West are still, like Asians in America are still significantly shorter than whites and blacks, and same with Hispanics, who are really a subset of Asians. They're still
sure. So
shorter than whites. And
sure.
blacks.
So we can demonstrate that variation in height between groups of people it can be primarily due or almost entirely due to genetics. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. But we're trying to find studies, or at least I'm trying to find studies or some sort of proof that variation in intelligence between groups is due primarily to genetic factors, because it seemed to be that your eugenics argument primarily rests on that assertion. Or if it doesn't, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
By the way, on this ground, I've seen a lot of people saying that I've been promoting eugenics or like gassing people or something like that. I don't know where your fans or you are even drawing this from, because I never said anything about forcible eugenics. I said I wanted to set up a eugenic environment.
Oh, yeah, I don't think you said it on stream. I think people were digging through your comment history where you've said some pretty extreme things.
In my comment history, I still don't think I've ever seriously proposed like gassing people that are below a certain IQ or something. I don't think I've ever proposed anything like that.
No, probably
More
not.
like just setting up societal structures, welfare incentives, stuff like that creates an intelligent population.
Sure. The phrase peaceful ethnic cleansing, though, that's kind of a hard one to swallow for most people, right? Similar to like peaceful communism. Like, can you really disenfranchise an entire group of people that have a certain level of wealth and then call that peaceful? Like, I'm not sure.
Well, can you really call the existence of a government peaceful?
To some extent.
Why does peaceful matter anyway? Everything the government does is backed by force, and I don't see you on here advocating anarchism. So you must be.
Well, I'm just saying that you're saying that, like, you don't understand why
you must be fine with some level of.
Sure, but I'm just saying that that's probably why people are associating with what you're saying with violence, because doing peaceful cleansing is probably not possible. I'm not saying that they're necessarily right. That would be my guess for the explanation.
Possible.
Richard
Spencer gave the example of the 1919 Paris Peace Conference, where they redrew the map of basically the entire world, took land from countries, moved populations around. They did that. So why would that not be something that we could replicate?
I don't know. I would have to look at the impact of how that happened. Also, I'm not sure if that happened on the basis of, like, literally people's skin color. I'm not sure. Also, I'm not sure if I would want to go to the early 1900s and replicate.
Why does that make a difference?
Because skin color, I think, is largely irrelevant.
If it's possible, doesn't make a well. If skin color is irrelevant, doesn't really matter to the conversation of peaceful ethnic cleansing being possible, does it? Skin color is just one grounds that you could peacefully ethnically cleanse people on.
Sure, I don't know if there's any ground that we could peacefully ethnically cleanse anybody in the United States of America in terms of how our country is set up right now. I don't think that that's possible to do, and especially not on the grounds of skin color.
I don't think it is either.
But
I don't think it is either, because I wish to destroy the United States so we can build a more perfect society with decentralist governments. So, and then from there you could expand and take territory and expel people.
Gotcha. Okay, so in looking at the Minnesota thing, I don't really think that was a strong proponent of the genetic aspect. There were some people that made interpretations that seemed to be largely disagreed upon, especially by the researchers themselves, that there might have been a genetic component, but it didn't seem like that study supported it very well. I moved on and I looked at the Mongolian thing. Everything I read about Mongolians tells me that they borrowed a lot of their appreciation for education and everything from China. I haven't seen any people put forth these strong arguments that Mongolians are smart because of their DNA, but more because they have a culture that values education very, very, very highly. That seems to be like the prevailing opinion that I found in regards to Mongolians and why they do so well on IQ tests and whatnot.
Well, that only works if you think that IQ is an educationally based test, which it's not. That's not what IQ tests. IQ doesn't test how well or how much knowledge you have. It tests general intelligence factor.
Well, it attempts to, but I'm pretty sure there are studies that correlate education with higher IQ achievement.
Well, no, but that's as you always say, who was the guy you were debating with the other day? That the Sargon of Akkad, retard guy that was saying, not Sargon of Akkad himself, but one of his fans that was saying, something about because of marriage, traditional marriage is the only way to pull black people out of poverty or something. You were getting on his case about causation not equaling. Correlation not equaling causation, and now you're making the same exact mistake that he was.
So here are claims that I've read about intelligence. So staying in school itself can raise IQ or prevent it from dropping, and dropping out of school can lead to a decrease in IQ. Do you disagree with these assertions?
Not necessarily, but you would have to think about why are people dropping out of school, or
are they
why
dropping
are they
out of school because they anticipate their IQ falling?
Well, if someone, let's say someone started getting into drugs or something, and then they dropped out of school, it would seem pretty likely that their IQ would fall if they're doing a bunch of retarded stuff that was impairing their cognitive ability.
So do you think every single person that drops out of school is dramatically impairing their cognitive ability such that they can't perform well on IQ tests?
That every single person that gets married is rich?
No, but it seems to be correlated as such. But I haven't seen these studies or correlations. I dropped out of school. I know lots of people. This is anecdotal. It doesn't matter. I don't think that the average person that drops out of school does so because they're becoming addicted to drugs. That seems like a very extreme claim. I mean, we could research
I
this.
didn't make the claim, though. I didn't make that claim.
Well, but you're making it sound like the reason.
It's one possible hypothesis of why lower IQ could be correlated with dropping out of school.
So why would people that?
But it could also be
regarding
something like the person isn't smart enough to be in school in the first place, so they drop out.
But then why would that cause the IQ to fall?
I'm not necessarily sure, but it could be something with their lifestyle choices. I'm not exactly sure on everything. It could be that they don't care as much, so they score like they don't put in as much effort, so they score a lot worse on the IQ test. I'm not really sure what it is, but you just saying that doesn't disprove that IQ is largely genetic.
Well, I mean, it might be largely genetic, but there might be environmental factors that can have a dramatic impact on it as well. That's always been my primary assertion.
Well, no, it wasn't, because just 2 or 3 weeks ago, I remember you saying that there was almost no genetic factor in intelligence.
I'm sorry, when I was talking about genetic factor in intelligence, I meant the variation of intelligence between groups, not intelligence itself. I'm thought that was what we were always discussing. So if I said that, I retract it now, or I admit I was wrong if that's what I'm here. But I've never believed that intelligence has no influence whatsoever from your genetics or whatever. Just that you can't use genetics to explain the difference in intelligence between groups. I thought that's what the conversation was always about.
I don't know. When you were talking to Dr. Illusion, I did not take that to be what you were telling him. But it may just be me misremembering. I'm not exactly sure. But I do not remember that being at all the context of the statements you were making.
Sure, it might be a semantic distinction that I need to be more careful to make in the future. But I mean, like, obviously your entire brain and everything comes from your DNA, like, is a genetic thing. So I mean, I've read in multiple places that there is a heritability attached to to intelligence, and that it's anywhere from 0.5 to 0.75 or 0.5 to 0.8 or whatever. So I mean, yeah, I acknowledge that it is a genetic thing, but typically when we're talking about these issues, we're talking about the variation between races, right? Not whether or not genetics is heritable or not.
Well, right, but when they figured out that the differences, but once again, when they figured out that the differences in height between races was not because of some discrimination or malnourishment, that there was a natural genetic difference between the races, they did it the same way. They found out about heritability, and then they assigned that the environment had an impact, but that the genetics was the bulk of it. So the same thing would apply here. If you don't reject the gains made in that department of knowledge, that height is largely due to genetics, and that the racial differences isn't down to discrimination or whatever, then it would seem pretty hard to me that you would pretty strange to me rather that you would dismiss this.
Well, because the testing for height, the height phenotype is a very simple thing to test for. It's a very simple phenotype to see. It's a very simple phenotype to measure. There is no disputes on how you should measure the height of somebody. Should it be fully standing or hunched over? And in terms of like isolating variables, you don't have to you take people's shoes off before they stand next to a measurement device or whatever, whereas intelligence is much more abstract, and it seems like the evidence for intelligence being this uniquely genetic thing that is primarily explained by genetics, and that all the variation between groups is explained by genetics. Like, I don't see any research that seems to support these assertions, except for people desperately clinging on to other research where the researchers themselves say it doesn't support the conclusions, and then trying to hijack that research and say otherwise. Like with the bell curve, Charles Murray himself says that he's not attempting to explain the difference between races, and said as much on Sam Harris's podcast that heritability doesn't explain the differences between races, but people want to seem to grab these studies and say that it proves that black people are inherently less intelligent than white people.
Well, I'm pretty sure what Charles Murray said is that the bell curve doesn't explain, or that heritability of IQ doesn't explain, or doesn't explain in the abstract the complete difference, but that it can explain the current difference.
You think that Charles Murray says that genetics explains the current difference in intelligence between the races, you think, is what Charles Murray says?
It's something like America. I think he's said that
I seriously doubt that. I mean, I listened to that entire podcast. I did not get that impression whatsoever. I really don't think he said. I would have remembered that statement. I'm almost positive of it. If
Well,
you
I don't think he just like comes out and says it like that explicitly, but like it's implied in what he's saying.
I mean, I don't want to ask you to listen to it all again, but if you can like remember a timestamp or something later and send it to me, I'll listen to it. But I really don't think, because when I went into that podcast, I was expecting to have to do a lot of reading to find out a lot about what I disagreed with or agreed with or figure it out. But Charles Murray doesn't seem to take any positions that would help a race realist or an ethnocentric guy, figure out that there are inherent genetic differences between the races. That doesn't seem to be Charles Murray's assumption or assertion at all.
Well, if you actually look through the history of Charles Murray, he used to be a lot more hardcore on this stuff. He's walked back a lot of the statements he made in the 1990s, and not even particularly about race, but also things like marriage and stuff like that. He wrote a whole book about the social decay of America after the sexual revolution, and like a ton of stuff. And these are things that he doesn't really even talk about that much anymore. So I don't know what exactly has happened to him, but just to be clear, this isn't the only the interview with Sam Harris isn't the only thing Charles Murray's done in his career.
Okay, but if this is a guy that you look up to and respect his research or whatever, and you see that he's made these changes over the past 2 to 3 decades, you write all of that off and you go, well, no, he was right at this particular point in his life, and everything past that has just been a mistake?
No, because I don't write off him, and he also doesn't come out against these things. It's just that he just doesn't really talk about certain things like he used to. I've never heard him explicitly come out and say, no, the differences between the IQ of whites and Asians in America isn't explained by genetics or something like that. He's never came out and said something like that. It's just he doesn't emphasize things the same way he used to.
Gotcha.
But here's where I'll take the conversation from here. So, in its environmental factors, what is the environmental factor that makes it so Ashkenazi Jews have an IQ of like 110, 111 in both America, Britain, Israel, and like basically every country that they live in? What is the environmental factor that makes that the case?
I mean, I'm not entirely sure. Jews have their own special culture and shit. I don't know how Jewish people live their lives, but I haven't seen any studies that point to specific genetic factors that, mark them for having super high intelligence. Wait, are we on Skype?
No, we're on
Skype?
Discord.
No, I didn't know if we were friends on Skype or not. Okay, never mind.
Well, what I'm saying though is it's unlikely or actually even impossible that Jews who face all this discrimination or whatever and that in like all these different countries they would have like the same intelligence level seems pretty unlikely to me.
But you don't know that. Like, I could say, like, this is the problem. Like, you have a conclusion that you want, and you're just kind of doing whatever you can to get there. So, for instance, you say that it would seem highly unlikely to me that, that Jews all across the world have the same intelligence. Like, there must be a genetic thing there, right? Like, I mean, you could just as easily say, like, if I were to take a plant that grows to a certain height, and I were to plant it all over the world, right? I wouldn't necessarily expect that plant to grow the same way in every part of the world, right? Because there's a ton of different environmental factors everywhere that set that up. Like, I think you're underwriting the environmental factors, and you're acting like people just exist in these genetic vacuums or something. I don't think that's how society necessarily works these days.
No, but the thing is, once you eliminate those once you eliminate the socioeconomic status argument and the discrimination argument, I don't really understand what you're basing your view on, that it could be explained by anything other than genetics.
I mean, don't Jews have a pretty special place in the world in almost every society they're in? Like, aren't Jewish people, like, it's even beyond, like, a religious thing, right? They identify as, like, a culture. They tend to have, like, their own kind of communities of people. Like, aren't Jewish people pretty special in those regards? Are there really countries where there are Jewish people that are, like, totally integrated into society and don't do any, like, Jewish things and are just, like, totally along with the rest of their friends and aren't... Is that, like, a normal thing in other countries? Like...
Well, in New York City, I would feel that there's a lot of Jews who have completely left the religion and are just atheistic or secular liberal Jews.
Yeah, but even like a secular Jew that's become a secular Jew, like didn't they grow up in a religious household where like if you're taught like don't you have to learn to read what is the Torah written in or whatever? Don't you have to learn to like read that and recite that shit for your bar mitzvah or whatever? Like it seems like education is like a very valued thing for Jewish people, like regardless of where you're at in the world. Like it seems like it's a big part of their religious instruction, no? Is it Hebrew?
I'm sure it is. I don't see what that has to do with the original point, though.
You don't see that having a culture that values education and educating children from an early age might be reflected in IQ scores later in life, regardless of where these groups of people might be in the planet?
Well, what people don't value education?
I mean...
Is there a people that don't?
Sure. Comparatively speaking, I would say that Asian people in general, or the Chinese people that come here, or Japanese people or South Korean people tend to value discipline and education far more than American people. Yeah, for sure. Do you disagree with that statement? Do you think that everybody around the planet values education the same?
Well, I don't think they value it. Well, it's a tough question because
I think it's a really easy question.
They might value education the same, but that might express itself differently relative to their way of life.
Yeah, so an Asian parent that is very much like harboring, or not harboring, but like very much babysitting and helicoptering their children like crazy to do their studies is going to have a much different impact on that child's level of education and maybe even their IQ, as opposed to like an American that's like, oh, good job, you got all B's, like congratulations. Like, I would say I think you can say pretty resolutely that Americans as a whole probably don't push their kids in education in the same ways that some Asian cultures do. I think that's a fair statement to make. I don't think that's very disagreeable or controversial.
I think both of them push education far too much, but other than that, yeah, I would. Obviously, there's countries that push education much harder, like Korea or Japan or something. But it seems that it doesn't have that big of an impact because once they move to the West, their IQ is still within a few points, within 2 or 3 points of the same as it would be in their native country.
So I tried, this was the third point you gave me, and I tried to find information on this, but I really couldn't find any sources on it at all. This idea that IQ goes back to whatever your country is, I tried to look at this, and I tried to Google a lot of different, I tried to Google regression to the mean, race, IQ going back to, I tried to Google like 15 different phrases, and I couldn't find anything. Do you have like any kind of sources or anything that, rather than just like looking at random numbers, like is there anything that actually backs this up?
What I would look up is like the IQ of Indians in India, and then the IQ of Indians in Britain, and the IQ of Indians in the US, and then look at it relative to population size.
Okay, but that's not a good way to conduct that kind of study because you don't know if there are environmental factors that will be influencing these things. Right?
Like I'm sure that there's been more cohesive studies about it.
Okay, well, if you can find some, I would love to see them because I don't think just Googling the average IQs of people is a good way to do a determining study of whether or not people travel to another country and then regress towards a mean of their native country. That sounds like a very particular study that you would have to do careful controls for. You can't just Google IQ numbers and say like, well, look, they all go back to normal.
Here in front of me, and I'm not gonna go like fishing for a bunch of sources, but I've definitely seen stuff to prove that the IQ does.
You don't have to do it now, but I mean, I went and I looked through all of your sources, so I mean, it would be nice if you could send me something later. The reason why I asked if we were on Skype is because I was going to send you this paper that tracks IQs. It seemed like regardless of IQ at childhood age, education did show a positive impact on IQ later in life, even if the child was starting off at a lower position at an earlier age. So I was going to send you this and maybe a couple other things if you didn't believe that IQ was at all correlated, or not correlated, but maybe there's even a causal relationship between education and IQ. But yeah, I mean, for the regression to the mean IQ thing, I couldn't find. You said there must be studies. I feel like I would be really interested in reading some of those because it sounds like an interesting thing, but I couldn't find any of that. I did see something on your alternative hypothesis website about ideas about how IQs kind of will regress from higher deviations into like a 50% thing. Like I was reading a little bit about that, but it didn't speak to anything, even on that website, about racial groups like regressing towards IQs of the countries that they came from. I couldn't find any of that information.
I think where I saw that was on the website AMRAN, which is American Renaissance, which is Jared Taylor's organization. He talks a lot about that fact, and I think he's published a lot of not published data, but collected data on it. So it might be somewhere on there.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I mean, if you can send it to me, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll look later, but so I guess we're still seem kind of stuck in the same place, where I'm showing you a huge totality of evidence that supports my position, and then you're just saying that, well, it's too complex of a thing or whatever, and then
so the problem was
dismissing it.
Half of the evidence you showed me, the researchers themselves disagreed with. You're giving me your own personal interpretation as a layman. I'm never going to take the interpretation of a layman over the researchers themselves. I think that's an unreasonable position for you to maintain. You have to agree with that. You cannot possibly assert that I need to take the interpretation of a layman over the researchers themselves. I don't think that's a very valid position to take. Do you?
Well, is Richard Lynn a layman to you?
No, but the researchers themselves authored a response to him, along with another guy that jumped on with a response, pointing out all of the flaws in his statement and pointing to things like the prenatal environments of black children, the fact that the black children were adopted later on in life, the fact that when this study happened, these black children were still very much present in a very racially segregated America, right? I think the study was in the 70s, so these children were literally born when their parents were still living under Jim Crow and shit. So, I mean, there were a lot of different things going on there that they authored in their responses to him. So, no, I reject his interpretation of the study, and I favor the original author's interpretation, especially based on the response that they made to Lynn exactly.
Well, I've read a lot of those responses, and none of that, and I've always seen the hereditarian side sufficiently refute it. So usually,
I think that's
what I usually see is the environmentalist side usually uses a lot of emotion and appeals to emotion to say that, or they basically try to deflect it and say it's too complex, we don't know, whatever. And
well, because intelligence is very complex, and you're trying to appeal to intuition. Well, look at all these Jews all over the world. They're all intelligent. It must be genetic. That's a very fallacious statement. It's an absurd statement to make. Environment, and you talk about G, right? An IQ test doesn't necessarily test for G. It tries to get as close as possible, but G is a very abstract concept, right? And there are still some people that even debate, like how well you can test for it in any test, and whether or not it can be improved later in life, and whether, that's a very, very complicated. Intelligence is an insanely complicated subject. So to pretend that you've presented a totality of evidence pointing in favor of what you're saying is incredibly absurd. Like when I have to dig so hard to try to find these articles that you're talking about, and they either don't exist, like this regression to the mean that you talk about, or the interpretations of the researchers themselves don't support your position, it seems kind of strange for you to say that you've presented me a totality of evidence that I'm just rejecting.
Well, is it that the research is hard to find, it doesn't exist because it's incorrect, or is it because people are afraid to talk about the subject because they'll lose their government funding? Which one do you think is more likely? Do you think that this is just like such an uninteresting topic that like no research like should exist on it, that it should be this hard to find sources on things about intelligence? Like,
it's not that it's hard to find sources. It's just that, like, even like, for instance, and I can find this for you if you want me to look it up, that I read there was a meta-analysis of some of the most popular genetic studies that were showing that, like, okay, well, maybe intelligence is like very closely tied to genetics, and it's going to be a big determining factor regardless of environmental effects. And even these meta-analyses failed to use the predictions that they made about other genetic markers to try to replicate the results, and it ended up being that the large majority of these tests were probably false positives, because the types of results that should have been expected using their data just couldn't be replicated across any other thing. And these are fairly large. I think the meta-analysis that I read was of like 13 or 14 different studies testing a large number of people and looking for genetic markers to try to figure out like if these studies are legitimate or if they were just false positives. And the end result of these meta-analyses was that there was probably a lot of false positives. It's not that I don't think they shouldn't be studied. It's just a very, very intelligence is an incredibly abstract thing. It's a very hard thing. It's like economics. Like, how do you like resolutely say like this economics is correct or wrong, or this form of government? Like, these are all very abstract concepts.
Well, that's not very how is that abstract?
Intelligence?
No, well, economics and intelligence, either one. I don't think either one of them are particularly abstract.
So when you talk about abstraction, what I'm talking about are things that are getting away from concrete kind of things and more things that are the confluence of multiple things. So for instance, math is not very abstract, right? Math is very concrete, very finite, very discrete, right? Physics is not...
No, I don't think that's true at all.
What?
Isn't math one of the most like abstract things like ever?
In terms of your understanding of math, no, math are some of like the few things that we consider to like be able to assert like axiomatic truths about. Like math is a very concrete, like math is when I talk about levels of abstraction, I'm talking about so like physics to some extent, or rather like engineering, we'll say is a type of abstraction from physics, right? Would you agree with that? That engineering is kind of like an abstraction of physics?
Yeah.
So you take what you learn in math, right? You can apply it to physics. You can take what you learn in physics and apply it to engineering, right? You can take what you know from chemistry and apply it to biology. Biology, in some ways, is kind of an abstraction of chemistry, right? Health is kind of an abstraction of biology. Health and medicine is kind of an abstraction of biology, right? Things like economics or anthropology or sociology or psychology, these things are many levels removed from testing very simple things, right? When you get into psychology and you're testing, like, you can't just like shoot somebody up with dopamine and test like the effects of a neurotransmitter, right? Because you have so many different variables. You're at so many levels of abstraction removed from just testing like A plus B equals C, right? You've got the impact of the environment, of a wildly complicated environment that could have impacts over biology over long periods of time. Like when I say levels of abstraction, this is what I'm talking about.
Right. Well, I don't think these types of arguments from complexity are actually like legitimate arguments in a faithful way. Like I don't think you're actually trying to make an argument when you're saying this.
So do you think that studying psychology is as easy as, do you think that doing psychology experiments are as easy as doing physics experiments or chemistry experiments?
It depends on what it would be, but
so I think that this should be
on how many environmental factors you want to limit.
So this should be a very easy answer. The answer is almost always it's absurdly more complicated to test something in psychology or sociology or economics than it is to test something in chemistry or physics. Because in chemistry,
it is because there's not a direct link. But if you wanna put enough resources into it and make and limit environmental factors, and if you wanted to be like possibly unethical about it and just like lock people in rooms and like make them do what you say or whatever, then I don't think it would be that hard to test these things.
Okay, so you agree with me then. You're playing semantics because you're saying, well, for psychology, I don't think it's necessarily that hard. You just have to dump a fuck ton more money into it, a fuck ton more time into it, and a fuck ton more effort. So it is harder. It is significantly harder. You agree with me. You're trying to name all the extra steps you'd have to go through to test these things as opposed to doing a simple chemistry or physics experiment.
Well, it's harder in that it requires more resources, but it's not hard. But it's like, but it being harder doesn't mean that the results are less valid or that you can't get valid results. That's what I'm trying to say.
Of course, it doesn't mean that, but it means that the results can be interpreted a million different ways. That's the problem when you're talking about these levels of complexity. If you look at if you look at like photosynthesis, right, and you look at how the molecules interact with themselves to produce water and oxygen, at the end, it's not really open to interpretation, right? It's just not, right? You can't really argue that something else is happening that's not happening, right? Whereas if you look at a psychology experiment or something in economics or social policy, there's a multitude of variables that can dramatically impact the arguments that you make. It's incredibly more complex. And I don't know, in terms of psychology, short of literally breeding people in dark rooms, I don't know if you can actually control for every environmental factor, right? You try as well as you can in as many different ways, but when we're talking about psychology, like, this is a very, very complex topic, right? And intelligence is a very complex topic within an already complicated field. So to act like, this is something that you can very easily measure and you can very easily demonstrate this in a study or two, it seems a little bit absurd to me.
Sure, but see, this is what I'm disagreeing with you on, it seems. You're basically saying that anything short of mapped out genetic material or whatever, concrete genetic evidence, regardless of like no testing can work other than mapped out human genomes to determine if traits are heritable. That's basically what the argument that I feel you're making here.
It's not that no testing is valid, but just that you would have to see a fuck ton of testing done in a very specific way, and then replicated to try to get close to making these kinds of claims that intelligence can variations in intelligence can largely be explained by genetic factor, and these types of studies that support this thing just don't exist.
Well, do you think that? So what you're saying basically is that we don't know, and that it's almost impossible to ever know. But your null hypothesis anyway is going to be egalitarian blank slateism.
I mean, it might be, but that's going to manifest differently if there are indeed large genetic differences between races in terms of what they're capable of. But I'm not saying that we can't know the answer. Maybe we can. I think that if there is a real answer, I think that we'll eventually close in on it, but just that it's going to take a lot of research to do it, and that right now there is not this totality of evidence that the variation in G between races is 100% explained due to genetics, or 90% explained due to genetics. That research doesn't really exist.
Okay, so why? I'm not going to grant you that premise, but even if I did, why would the null hypothesis be equality then?
I mean, I can think of a couple things. One, even people of lower intelligence can still contribute to society more. Two, maybe you can boost intelligence by having types of affirmative action programs in place or something like that to help these people along more if they need the help. Three, intelligence still exists on a bell curve, so you still want the best and brightest from these communities, even if there's not as many of them proportionally as there are from other groups of people. 4 or 5, you wouldn't, if you did this cutoff of other races because you wanted to get rid of low IQ people, I don't think you're about to start getting rid of low IQ people in your own race. 6, it probably helps the entire world, including all the high IQ people, if everybody in the world is getting along better and doing better. So starting eugenic wars with people or wars against other races probably doesn't contribute to an overall better quality of life for everybody. 7, the chances of enacting any sort of policy like this are almost impossible, probably impossible, whether that's because public approval will never be at that level or because it's just not realistic to do it. And I'm sure I could think of some other reasons too, where even if there was a variation in intelligence, we wouldn't necessarily act on it. But those are like 7 reasons off the top of my head.
So, do you think that it's a good risk to say that our null hypothesis is human egalitarianism, and now we're going to import 500 million non-whites or non-Asians into America, and we're gonna reduce the IQ down to 70 in hopes that one day maybe we'll be right, we'll be proved right, and these Africans will, for the first time in history, be equal to whites. So you think that that's a risk worth taking, doing irreparable damage to your society in hopes that one day your null hypothesis based on nothing but feelings will be proved right?
So firstly, I'm not basing anything on feelings. I'm basing everything on empirical data. Okay, I think you're the one coming from it from a feeling aspect because you feel very strongly about the white.
Okay,
empirically?
I think when I called myself an ethno-nationalist in the last video, I think that was a little bit off base, in fact.
Well, I mean, you've talked about peaceful eugenic cleansing to create an all-white state. I think ethno-nationalist is a pretty fair descriptor.
Well, I never said all-white, but what I meant when I said ethno-nationalist is that I believe a nation, or that I believe the state, the government, should generally be looking out for the interests of its majoritarian population. That's basically what I had meant by that.
Sure. Okay, so this is what I would do if I was in charge of all policy. First of all, nobody's talking about letting in 500 million people immediately. I'm not sure where that came from. So what you do is
wait, one sec. So the population in Africa is supposed to increase by 3 billion in the next couple 50 years or so, or whatever.
Yeah, eventually cap out, yeah.
We're either going to have to dump tremendous amount of resources into Africa to keep these people alive, or bring them here to keep them alive. Otherwise, they're going to die. So
the population of Africa has been increasing. We even had to dump a ton of resources to keep them alive. Why don't you think they can figure out ways?
Are you kidding? You don't think we've dumped a ton of resources into Africa?
Not anything on the level of shipping 500 million people to our country, no. I mean, we've made large advancements in technology, things like the, what's that special rice or whatever that can feed more people. Like, we've made a lot of advancements in agriculture and whatnot that have allowed people to feed themselves. Like, I think we already have enough food in the U.S. alone to feed the entire world. It's just a distribution issue. I'm not saying that we should be in charge of distributing food all across Africa, but this idea that as Africa grows as a continent, that it's going to need to get help from other places, that's a very big fallacy. That doesn't make any sense. The entire world has grown, and it's not like that's like saying that like the population of the planet in whatever was 100 million, and if we're going to grow to 6 billion, we need people from Mars to come over and feed us. Like, Africa can grow and become self-sustaining. You know, more people in Africa have moved out of poverty over the past 50 years in the entire history of the fucking continent or whatever. Like, I don't see this reason why you think that Africa is going to necessarily need fuck tons of help, and it has to export all of its people in order to survive as a continent. Oh, golden
Because
rice.
I don't believe a population with an average IQ of 70, genetic or not, is going to be able to support itself.
Well, I guess empirically we'll have to see. Only time will tell.
Well, empirically, it's true that they haven't been able to do it ever. So, I mean, I don't know why you would assume that.
Well, I mean,
suddenly
what
they
about like
would.
the countries of like either like the kingdoms of Egypt and shit? I mean,
Egypt has an average IQ of like 90.
okay, and it was a pretty big fucking civilization at one point in time. No, like.
You can have a pre-industrialized
Okay, so
civilization.
now it's only
with an IQ of
post-industrial that's
90.
impacted by IQ?
No, but what I'm saying is it's a lot easier to have the type of society that the Egyptians and the Aztecs had back then and be an empire with an average IQ of 90 than it is to have an average IQ of 90 and have the type of empire that the Western world has now.
I'm not even sure if that's true. But
Well, it's a lot easier for people with an IQ of 90 to go out and do farming work and plow the fields and whip the cows than it is to sit on a computer and learn about how to code and stuff like that.
yeah, but the average American citizen doesn't know how to sit on a computer and learn how to code. The average American citizen can still have trouble sending emails, right? And even in some of these pre-industrial tribes, their utilization of tools and different methods for farming went on are very, very, very complicated. Like, I don't know, this looking at like, well, these guys have computers, so they're ultra super smart, and these guys don't, so they're ultra super stupid is like a really naive way of looking at intelligence, I think.
That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, though, that Western countries are so much more complicated now than empires in the past have been.
Sure.
So it's kind of foolish to say, well, the Egyptians, who are a mixed race, people with lots of different ethnicities in it and stuff like that. Well, they had a great civilization for a couple thousand years, so the Egyptians can be just like Japan now or something.
I mean, like, you say that, but if you were to transplant 100 random white people in the United States to some land and tell them that they needed to figure out farming and livestock and everything, these people would probably die. Like,
What, are you kidding? Have you never heard of Australia? It was a prison colony of Britain.
Okay, but do you think that the average... I'm just saying that you can't just look at like a certain type of skill that exists right now and go, well, this skill is much higher intelligence than any other skill, than the skill of like hunting. Like, if you were to find like a hunter-gatherer tribe, these people probably know a great deal about the utilization of tools, different ways to hunt and track livestock, or not livestock, I'm sorry, different ways to hunt and track game, different methods of, you could look at early farmers, people that know how to farm, people that know how to do crops and whatnot. Like, I don't think that it's fair to say that because these people sit and use computers, they're so much more inherently intelligent than people that go out and hunt food or grow food on their own. Like, I don't think that's a very fair statement to make.
No, that's not, because for instance, if I said, well, the Europeans 400 years ago, they didn't have any computers, so they're stupid. But what I'm saying is, as the technology of the society advances, it takes in higher IQ population to do it. The population could have originally had just as high of an IQ, but they couldn't have utilized it because they didn't have the technology. But once you reach a certain point, it seems unlikely that low intelligence people will be able to do these tasks that require a baseline level of intelligence. Like Charles Murray said with his example about why IQ is important, you don't have to be a football player, to be a lineman in the NFL, you have to weigh 350 pounds. Not if you, what am I trying to say here? You can if you're over that threshold, then you're good to go. But if you're below it, then you're pretty much fucked, and you can't do anything.
Yeah, sure, but we've seen. I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with like the Flynn effect, right?
Yes.
Like as countries have become more healthy and have more nutrition when available to them, IQ scores have been rising since I think the 1930s. Like all different types of intelligence have been rising around the world. I guess like in looking at this,
Yeah,
like
now it's declining.
well, I'm not sure. I haven't seen that yet. I guess I'll go. Do you have a source on that? You think intelligence around the world is declining, or
Not around the world. In Western countries, it is declining though.
okay? So right now, I haven't seen any
It's
studies.
lost an average IQ of like 6 points.
Gotcha. I haven't seen any studies in the West that have shown that immigration is like destroying the United States. I haven't seen these studies. If at one point,
Well, what do you mean? The United States is already destroyed, so how can
how is the
something be
United States
destroyed?
already destroyed?
Well, we live in a time where essentially we live in a time of ultra feminism,
What do you mean by
ultra
ultra-feminism?
liberalism, men aren't shackled. So,
So it feels like we're moving now into personal opinion and feels arguments over fact of IQ. Do you think that low IQ people contributed to feminism, or
no, feminism was mostly a movement by high IQ Europeans and high IQ Jews.
maybe if we had more low IQ people, then this wouldn't have happened?
Actually, yeah, that's true. If you look around the world, most places with low IQ are pretty
Patriarchal?
low on the. Yeah, exactly.
Oh shit. Okay, so
Fucking just like rape and kill women just to keep them in their place.
so in looking at the United States, okay, so I said that I haven't seen immigration like destroying the United States, but you said that the United States is already destroyed. So okay, so one reason was feminism.
Feminism is too light of a word, I think, because it's
Okay.
not just feminism, but also sexual revolution and personal freedom.
Okay, and you're against sexual freedom and personal freedom? Is that a fair statement, or do you want to expand on that
I
a
just
little
said,
bit?
yeah.
Oh, I didn't. It didn't
Well,
go through. I didn't hear it.
okay. So what I mean by it is, essentially, we're living in a time where the proper sexual structure incentive structures are completely flipped upside down, where essentially women rule. So what it is women are the ones who choose to have sex with people, right?
I don't know. It depends on who you are, I guess.
Well, okay. Well, this is in general for any species. What determines male and female and is essentially gametes, and gametes are how many eggs or sperm you make, or so how many genetic reproduction units you make. So the female will always be the one that produces less gametes, and the male will always be the one that produces more gametes. And so women naturally seems how they're the ones with the scarce resource, are the ones that choose
Okay.
to have sex. So what we have now is where women choose, and the counterbalance to that used to be that we have these patriarchal institutions that keep them shackled. We have monogamy, the institution of marriage, and all these other things that keep it so the sexual order is somewhat balanced. Now we have a situation where maybe the top 15 or 20% of guys get with the bottom 80% of the women because they're hypergamous and they only try to go after the best men. And it's just leaving the average person completely fucked.
Then how is society even existing today if 80% of women?
Well, I don't know if society is existing today. You look at somewhere like Germany, they have a birth rate of what, 1.2? How much longer is the society going to exist?
Sure. These birth rates have all been dropping off, though, since countries have reached industrialized status. Like, these birth rates were dropping off even, like, just post-World War II in the United States, all across the world. You're blaming all of this on feminism, and maybe not just the fact that
What are you talking about? There's a huge baby boom after World War II.
Yeah, but after that baby boom, when people were coming back, like, rates have been sloping off, like, all over the world.
is when sexual liberation took off on the college campuses. So I don't know what you mean.
Why can you say that that's for sure 100% the reason, and maybe not that people are more interested in pursuing jobs, or that people don't have to have so many children because their children don't fucking die all the time, or that people don't have to necessarily have a ton of children because they don't have to send them to work, like, or that people want more freedom to choose and do other things? Like, why does it have to be because 80% of the women are after 15% of the guys? Why can't any of those other explanations sit in as well?
Well, they all factor in, but I mean, it's just an empirical fact that women are hypergamous, they go for the best men, and men are polyamorous, they go for the most women. So once the institution of marriage is destroyed, can you expect anything other than total dysfunction in a society? And we all know that sexuality is the base of any civilization. Without a healthy sexuality, you don't have a country or a nation or a civilization. It'll be completely destroyed. So
what's wrong with just fucking a lot of people and then eventually settling down and getting married with somebody? I mean, people don't tend to be polymarital, or I want to say polyamorous, but I don't know if that implies marriage as well. But like, it seems like people generally only get married to a single person. Why can't people be sexually free in their 20s or whatever, and then eventually just get married to a single person? Is that not okay?
Well, I'm sure, as you would know, men don't really want to marry with whores, so that's one
What's
thing.
wrong with? Well, maybe that's something that societally we can overcome because it's not really that big of a deal.
Well, marrying a whore is essentially akin to settling for the lowest product, for the lowest value product you could possibly.
Do you only value somebody based on the number of sexual partners they have? Is that the number one important factor when you're deciding like whether or not somebody? So like let's say you find a woman and she's got like a PhD in computer science, but she's willing to give it all up and stay home and take care of your children forever if you're whatever your dream like submissive wife is, and she wants to do all these things, but then you find out that she's had sex with 5 guys, so now she's like invalid as an option to be married to. Why is that like such a big deal?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, like I'm saying, I don't care about computer science or whatever. I like computers, but if my wife is a computer scientist and I'm working anyway, how does that help anything?
Dual income household? I don't know, a more intelligent wife to have more intelligent children?
Well, yeah, of course you would say dual income household, because after World War II, during World War II, as you know, women were forced into the workforce because their husbands were all at war, killing each other for a Jewish global agenda. So all these men were out, and then the women had to.
Which Jew told the Japanese emperor to go and bomb Pearl Harbor? Which Jew was that was pulling the strings there?
Do anything?
Wait, what did you say?
Well, World War II is a direct result of World War One, right?
Okay, so they were controlling World War II all the way from World War One. The Jews were.
World War One was the first political war, right? Do you agree with that? It was the first war over ideological politics. Like obviously there's like the Civil War, stuff like that. Different things, different civil wars, but the World War One was really the first global war over political ideology, trying to abolish the monarchy and stuff like that, right?
Or like the Revolutionary War. I feel like this isn't a true statement at all. I don't think this is true at all.
I said between countries. Like, it's really like
well,
there's
the
never
Revolutionary War involved the Kingdom of Great Britain, France, the colonies in the United States. I'm sure there were other players involved as well.
Well, France was involved in the Revolutionary War only so far as they were trying to secure resources, but the Britain was America at the time, so America was a colony of the British Empire. So
okay, so
well, regardless, either way.
Regardless. Okay, I don't want to talk about the Zionist World War II conspiracy. So what's wrong with marrying somebody if they've been with some number of partners? Why is this like a horrible thing?
Well, do you understand why monogamy is an important institution?
Not really. I have no value in monogamy, but
actually, before I answer that, let me go back to what I was saying before you interrupted me about the Jewish agenda or whatever. So women were first forced into the workforce, and then all this stuff came out. Rosie the Riveter, oh, you can do it. You can be just as good as a man. And people think that feminism came about because just because women wanted to be free. Well, women hated it. That's the whole reason they created all this government propaganda for it. Originally, when it came, the whole reason for feminism is because of the changing economic standards due to globalization. So then they invented this thing. Oh, well, why don't we have two incomes instead of one? Because if we have two incomes, then that means that we can support our family better and stuff like that. And maybe you can just get a part-time job, or maybe you can hire a daycare person. Either way, we'll have way more resources. And then that's where feminism really took off. And then from there, what happened was the value of wages dropped off significantly, which should be no surprise to anyone. If you introduce more people into the labor pool, wages are going to drop. So now we're in a situation where it's almost mandatory to have multiple wages supporting a house instead of just one. And now the children are getting less attention, which leads to things like lower intelligence, which leads to things like worse social skills, so on and so forth. So how can you tell me that this is a good thing?
That which part is a good thing? I'm sorry.
Tell me that any of that is a good thing. That now two people have to work instead of one.
Okay, so firstly, I think that two people can work and you can still give a lot of attention to your children. One person can do part-time work, or you can both be working while the children are in school, right? Once they hit the age of 4 or 5 or 6, depending on what type of school you enroll them in, you've got.
Well, that's if you're gonna have one kid. But why would you only have? Like, that's only if you're going to have, like, one kid, so...
Okay, what if you have 2 kids? You don't think you can enroll them in school? And then...
Well, then you're still talking about at least, like, 7-8 years of your life that one parent should be home with the child, right? At least.
You can do that, sure. But I mean, you can still have women that are working and are going to school. It doesn't necessarily have to be the mom that stays at home with the kids. It could be the father, or the mom could stay at home with the kids for 5 or 6 years and then go back to her work afterwards. I mean, once the kids start...
It actually does have to be the father in a sense, because you understand that the whole separation between male and female is down to males being the resource providers and females being the caretakers. And this isn't just in humans, it's in basically every single species other than maybe a select few. So
is that even true? Don't female lions, aren't they the big hunters in like prides and shit, and then males just like kind of dick around over territory and shit? I think female spiders eat the male spider. I'm not sure. I guess that might be true. I don't know if that's true. I don't want to accept it because I can think of a few notable exceptions right off the bat, but
but
I mean, even if
it certainly is the case for humans, though.
Well, but not necessarily, because now women can hold high-paying jobs where they're making a lot of money, more than some men. So why can't they be the ones that...
And that's not natural, though.
What's natural about working a job?
There's nothing natural about working a job, and that's actually one of my biggest problems, is the glorification of meaningless labor over the well-being of your spirituality.
So all work should be abolished so that we can be spiritual again? I mean, you talk about natural. Nothing is natural about spirituality. I mean, what?
No, well, work exists so that we can increase our standards of living. But most men, traditionally, most men didn't view their work as some great achievement in their life. It's not where they got their value from. Where they got their value from was their family, their religion, what they did for fun. They didn't get their value from, oh, I'm gonna go work a job. Isn't work so great?
Okay, hold on. I want to back this all up because I had initially asked a question. Actually, we're so many questions removed from the original. Okay, hold on. I'm just curious on this thing. So why can't you marry somebody who's been with 4 or 5 partners? Why is this not acceptable?
Because it shows that they've bought into the moral decadence of the West.
So. And by moral decadence, you mean they've decided that they've wanted to engage in sexual activity with multiple people before getting married? That's moral decadence?
Sex is procreation, so if you're having sex with multiple people just for a physical pleasure, then why would that be accepted as moral?
Well, sex isn't only for procreation; it can be done for enjoyment as well.
So sex can be done for enjoyment as well. So So what you're saying is that there's nothing sacred about sex.
No, what would be sacred about sex? No, what you touch your organ enough?
There's nothing sacred about. There's nothing sacred about something that propagates the existence of the species for millions of years.
No, it's literally just a physical reaction. Everything can be traced down to chemical reactions. There's nothing sacred at all about it. Of course not. It's combination, replication of DNA.
Okay, then what's so bad about rape if it's nothing but a physical reaction? Because as far as I can tell, the only way that you can say that rape is bad is if you view sex from the Catholic or the Christian view of it being sacred.
What if you say rape is bad because you're violently assaulting somebody else in a way that they don't want to be assaulted? Don't you think that's an okay argument to make?
Well, it's no more morally wrong than tapping them on their shoulder, right?
Do you think that forcibly inserting your penis into somebody that doesn't want it to be there is the same as tapping somebody on the shoulder?
If you don't view sex as something sacred, then another chemical reaction is just a chemical reaction, right? There's no big deal to it, really.
I mean, murder is just reactions, but that doesn't make it okay. We were talking about whether or not sex is sacred, not whether we can assign a moral good or moral bad to it. You're conflating a lot of different things right here. Sex is just are chemical reactions in the brain and physical reactions in the body. And so there's nothing sacred about it. If you want to talk about the sacredness of something, sure, but I'm not. But I mean, again, like murder, like decapitation is just chemical reactions. Blood can't flow to the brain anymore, and you cease to function. Your spine becomes disconnected. But that doesn't make it okay. Like,
sure, but the reason that you're saying it's not okay is just because of a physical sense, because of the physical damage it's done. But when people talk about why rape is bad, aren't they usually talking about because it violates something sacred?
Not necessarily. It could just be violating your personal space.
Okay, why is rape worse than getting punched in the nose or punched in the stomach then?
It's usually a worse violation, but depending on the severity of the assault, I don't think that there is a big difference. I would consider like rape to be on a pretty similar level of somebody like coming up and like really beating the shit out of you or something. Sure, I would put these on similar levels.
Not according to feminists, not all rape is violent, right? Like,
I'm not arguing from the extremist feminist perspective.
A dad just goes into his daughter's room at night and sleeps with her while her mom's asleep, and there's no violence involved because she's too afraid to scream. So there's no violence, so there's nothing wrong with it, right?
No, because you're bringing in a whole other slew of issues on whether or not minors can truly consent, and also if somebody's doing something under threat of force, it's probably not a morally good thing.
The daughter is 18, and it's not the dad; it's some step uncle or something. Then what is your argument against how that would be moral if you don't view sex as something sacred?
Typically, in terms of healthy sexual relationships, I look at power dynamics. I mean, if it's like an uncle that you never see or some shit, and the daughter is of an age that we've decided is old enough to consent to sexual activity, I don't necessarily think it's a big deal. The father-child relationship is much different because parents are oftentimes in a structure of power over the child, so it makes the ability to consent ambiguous or impossible. Kind of like if a professor or if an employer propositioned sex from you, it's very hard to refuse or consent freely at that point because there could be repercussions if you don't.
Why does consent matter, though? In your example,
consent matters because I believe that in society we should respect the freedoms and the autonomy of individuals. I think that's why the primary purpose that government exists is to protect the rights of individuals.
Okay, so there's plenty of women that regret having sex, right?
Okay.
Afterwards, right? They were trying to get their man to settle down, but he didn't do it, whatever, right?
Okay. I don't believe that you can. I don't believe that you can post withdraw consent if that's the argument that you're going with. That I don't think that works that way.
For that, even in the moment, they don't really want to do it. They don't really like it, but they're trying to achieve a greater purpose from it. So what is the difference between that and raping someone?
Well, because they're making the choice to do it. Like I didn't really like going to the casino to work every day, but I mean I still kind of did it. But it's not. But there's a difference between that and slavery. right? If somebody's if
So
let's say you go to fuck your wife or a girlfriend or one night stand or whatever, and they're kind of not really into it, but they don't really care that much, and they know it makes you happy, like, yeah, sure, why don't we do it? Like, that's not the same as like raping somebody, because they're making the choice. They're saying like, yeah, it's okay, yeah, we'll do it. Like,
well, it's not the same as raping someone from my view, because I have the Catholic worldview where we recognize sex as something sacred. But from the feminist view, where sex is just a meaningless physical pleasure, it has no value to it.
so what you're doing is
I
you're
don't
presenting
really
it. This is a false dilemma. This is a false dilemma or a false dichotomy, whichever you prefer. You're saying that there are two views that can exist: either your view, the Catholic one, or this view that sex is nothing at all. Right? That's not true. There are far more views out there that are perfectly valid to hold. So in my view, sex is activity that two people can engage in that's mutually pleasurable, right? Or maybe only one-sided pleasurable, I guess, if it really sucks. But that's an activity that two people can consent to. It can be fully formed about and consent to. There doesn't have to be any sacredness involved for that to occur. Like asking a friend to go play a video game, asking to trade massages with somebody, or asking to trade sexual favors or activity with somebody. There doesn't need to be sacredness attached here to have a mutual respect for the other person, to have consent in the circumstance, and for it to be, like, respectful of both people's autonomy. You don't have to have religion or Catholicism to do that.
So autonomy is your ultimate thing now?
Now, well, I mean, I think that's generally what most principles in government are based on, is defending people's rights and liberties, which generally comes down to autonomy, your ability to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Well, taxation is theft, and the draft is slavery, so those are morally equivalent to rape, and they're morally should abolish them. Right?
You're trying to draw these false equivalencies. Just because two things are wrong doesn't make them equivalent. That's a fallacious use of that word.
Well,
actually,
right? No, because Catholics believe that we don't believe in scaling morality, that some things are more wronger, right? We believe in absolute morality, so no.
That's not true, because under Catholic rule, there are things that are mortal sins that can, like, guarantee you a fucking trip to hell that you cannot, like, repent from, and there are also things that aren't necessarily as big of a deal. That's not necessarily true. What?
You can always repent moral sin if you do enough work, right? Like, that's not true.
No, that's absolutely not true. The only way you can repent is if the repent is oh fuck, there's a fucking word for it. I don't remember. It's a name for it. You have to feel genuine contrition, I think, or you have to feel genuine repent for what you've done, and then only at that point can. It's not about work done afterwards or deeds.
I know exactly. So if you truly repent, then there is no you have to repent all sins. Basically, is the thing. In the intent that in your feelings about it being genuine is what's important.
Sure.
We don't say that oh well, this thing's evil, but this thing is also evil. But oh well, we're just going to allow this to happen freely because it's less evil than this other thing. That's not.
Well, it's not necessarily that something is less evil so much as it. Okay, do we want to talk about the sliding scale of morality, or do we want to talk about the difference between taxation and rape? Because these are two different topics. I think that in Catholicism, I think that you're generally going to be viewed upon harsher by God if you murder your brother, right, like Cain and Abel or whatever, versus if you, I don't know, like steal a bubble gum from a store. I think these things are looked at like pretty differently. Also, you can't repent suicide, but.
Well, sure, but besides the point. So
okay, well, sure. Okay, so besides the point. So looking at the difference between taxation and rape, because this is what we normally came on, right? In taxation, right, even though it's a forcible acquisition of funds, I guess to say it nicely, right? You're using threat of force to take from your citizens, right? We've kind of decided as a society that we're okay with making that sacrifice in general because there is a greater good that we get out of the contribution of taxes that we wouldn't otherwise have, right? So I don't think that's necessarily the same as rape, where we.
Okay, so you're taking someone's money that they earned at force, and if they refuse, you're sending men with guns to forcibly imprison them. If they refuse that, you're killing them. That's how generally you incrementally increase the violence you use to achieve the results you want. So you're doing that. How is that any different? Something that can ultimately end in rape or murder or imprisonment. How is that any less morally wrong to you if consent is the only thing than raping someone for 50 seconds?
Because taxing people gives us a good that we as a society have decided benefits pretty much every person in society. Rape is the depriving of somebody's personal freedom for the joy or pleasure of a single person. I don't think these are comparable.
So if everyone in society decided that we need to take virgins and tie them to poles and rape them before hanging them at the gallows, but it's for everyone's pleasure because all the men get to partake in this, and that would be morally okay to you?
No, because you're dramatically disenfranchising half of society to benefit the other half. That's probably not okay.
Okay, well, let's say our society is a pack of nomad warriors who run around raping people.
You also have to talk about the difference between the scale of action that you're taking. So, for instance, there might be levels of taxation that are equivalent to rape, but we're not at it anywhere near it right now. So, for instance, like let's say that our taxes were 100%, right? Where every single penny you earned was forcibly taken from you and given to the government, such that your children were like starving and dying if the government decided, right? You could make an argument that that level of taxation, maybe that might be more akin to raping somebody. But you're talking about rape, which has a severely detrimental impact on an individual, and then comparing that to like a 20% income tax where you also receive things in exchange for that. Like, I don't think these are comparable.
Pleasure, where like 90% of the time the women...
Wait, you cut off at the beginning of that. Can you repeat that sentence? Sorry. Okay. You came in at physical pleasure.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so if sex is just a physical pleasure and something like 70% of women reach orgasm during rape, then what is truly the damage done? Because there's nothing spiritual about it. There's no deeper meaning to sex. So it's just reaching
because you orgasm,
pertinent physical pleasure. So what's so bad about it?
Just because you orgasm doesn't necessarily mean there's physical pleasure involved. That's not how orgasms work.
Okay, well,
women oftentimes, for example, women oftentimes orgasm during birth when they're birthing children. That doesn't mean that there's physical pleasure involved. Anybody that's ever had an epidural will tell you as much.
Okay, well, it's not just orgasm. I'm just saying that sex is generally a pleasurable experience.
If it's somebody that you don't want it to be with, if you're dry and not ready to go, if the person is disgusting and they're taking you in force, you're very nervous when it's happening. Typically, women that are very nervous or on edge are not very receptive to having pleasurable sex. The vagina tends to lengthen when the canal itself, when the woman is more turned on. The vagina will lubricate more when the woman is turned on. Like just because somebody is putting their dick in you doesn't necessarily mean it feels good. Like that's very, very, very untrue.
Well, even regardless of if it feels good, more so to the original point, if all it is a physical pleasure, I see no way to make an argument that it's something so much more morally wrong than other forms of assault that
I don't necessarily think it is. I think that like savagely beating somebody, I think that's comparable to raping somebody. Sure, I know that society as a whole places more value on the rape, but that a lot of that comes because a lot of people are like you, that they do view it as some sacred thing. But I don't necessarily hold these views. If you want me to defend society's like obsession with the sexual purity that you kind of advocate for, I can't really do that. But I mean, if you're asking me personally, I do think that rape is on a similar level as like, really bad physical assault and whatnot. Sure.
See, I think the only place we're really disagreeing here then, or that you're disagreeing with my statement, is that you think that it's more violent than it actually is. That's really the only difference.
Rape?
Yeah.
I think that rape is pretty violent. Yeah, if the person doesn't want to be fucked and you go to fuck them, I think that's pretty violent. You disagree with that?
Well, most women don't have enough power to fight back anyway, so most of them just simply don't fight back. So it doesn't leave any physical injury.
If a guy came up and wanted to rape you, do you think that it's not really that big of a deal? Would that be not that big of a deal to you?
Obviously, it would be, but
why?
Because of my worldview of what sex is, and obviously of homosexuality. Furthermore, but
the guy could stimulate your prostate with his dick, and you might end up having an orgasm, or you'd at least come from doing it. So maybe it's not really that big of a deal. Like,
well, once again, the physical pleasure of sex plays an entirely second fiddle to the spiritual and the moral aspect of procreation. So
okay, and without that spiritual aspect, you think that everybody can just rape everybody?
I don't see anything morally wrong with it. No,
I gotcha.
I don't see how feminists can say that rape is a great evil, but at the same time, sex is a meaningless act. I don't really see what the difference
Well,
is
because when
between
you're raping somebody,
between a whore taking her 198th dick or taking her 198th dick by force. I don't see a huge difference there.
I mean, I eat steaks because I really enjoy steaks, but if somebody broke into my house and force-fed me one, I would consider that to be a great violation of my autonomy. Like, the consent part is like a very important thing, right? Much the same way that if I go into work every single day and I work to get a paycheck, there's a big difference between that and somebody forcing me to do it. The consent part is really important to respecting the individual's autonomy.
Well, consent is only important if you view consent as important, right? So, but it doesn't seem that you consistently apply your view of consent.
Where do I not apply my view of consent to?
Because you're saying that because you basically your whole thing is that as a progressive, or what do you consider yourself politically?
I don't know. I don't like the labels because it's too easy to misattribute views that I would have to defend or recuse. Like I don't know. I have individual positions on different things.
Yeah, I'm the same way, but let's just say you advocate the use of force in a lot of situations and violating people's consent in a lot of situations. So I don't understand how you can be so in love with violating people's consent in so many ways, and then when it comes to rape, which you don't even view as something sacred, you're completely against it. I don't understand.
So in the scenarios where we do violate consent, right? One, we try to do it in the least obstructive way possible, and two, we try to make sure that we're getting something, very good out of it. The temporary sexual pleasure that a guy might get from raping a woman is probably not worth the trade-off of a woman being raped, right? Whereas,
maybe he'll gift her with a baby, though, right? And then that's
maybe she doesn't want to have a baby.
Society. Well, regardless,
well, not regardless,
it's
whether or not you want
benefit to society.
That's
maybe
absolutely
our birth
not
rates
true.
Are really low.
That's absolutely
Maybe
not
our
true.
birth rates are really low. Maybe our birth rates are really low.
Having
so
a
we
broken
need to get
family,
some men to rape women just to get more babies.
This is empirically not true, because one of the largest problems that the black community faces is single black mothers. Okay, having a single parent household is one of the leading predictors of crime. So I don't think that raping people and forcing them to have children is a good way to solve the birth problem. Firstly, secondly, I don't know if a woman could ever love a child that it had because somebody raped her to give it to him. I don't know if that's going to be a well-functioning family.
Well, I'm implementing my eugenic policy now, and after we force men to rape women, we're going to take the babies and we're going to give them to adopted couples, so that way the children can have a really good life. But we need to do this because it increases the birth rate, and sex is meaningless anyway, right? According to the non-Catholic position, so what's the big deal?
You really can't fathom any worldview that doesn't involve your Catholic God? It's completely unfathomable to you that society could exist outside of this?
I can't fathom any objective morality outside of
But even the existence of your God is completely... Even the existence of your God relies on absurd premises that you have absolutely no evidence for. Your morality is just as subjective as any other person's.
If that was the case, then everything would be down to moral realism and consequentialism.
Sure, and maybe it is, but...
So maybe there's nothing wrong with raping women as long as we get babies that will benefit society after, right?
Unless
we're going to get the smartest
decided,
guys with the Aryan alpha seed to rape women, and they're going to produce babies with an IQ of 145, and these couples are going to raise them and give them the best education, and they're going to be the rocket scientists that send us to Mars to save the species. So there's nothing wrong with
society has made the decision that this is not the kind of society we want, in which case the consequence of you raping a woman is being sent to jail, where you're not going to be able to go to school and build rockets to get us to Mars.
Do you understand why our society decided rape is bad, though? Like, I don't know how you don't understand this. Like,
well, I understand it fully. I understand both points of view, such that I can give your point of view perfectly, but I don't think you can give mine. You can't fathom a system of morality that exists independent of a God figure. You're like the archetypal, like, religious person, like the Steve Harvey, like the guy that says it like, well, if you're not religious, you have no morals.
You have no way of objectively proving your morals. You have subjective morals.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. Everything is pretty morally relativistic, but that's kind of the reality of the world we live in, like.
Exactly. So after that, on the majority of things, I would establish moral consequentialism to decide what is best for society. But as my religion dictates, there are things that are moral and immoral, absolutely, from divine command theory and natural law.
Sure. But, I mean, it still goes back to the idea that it seems like you can't fathom a law or a world that doesn't exist outside of religious law that isn't like an insanely different world.
Can you
Yeah.
fathom a world?
Yeah, of
can
course.
you fathom
Yeah.
a world that views rape as a subjectively bad thing? Like it's not really that bad. Like,
Yeah, sure.
We'll do it sometime.
No, that's something that probably should never be done. Yeah, I can view that. Yeah, I think I can do
Yeah,
that.
I can view it too, though.
Well, but I can do it without religion. I understand how you can do it with religion, but you can't seem to understand how somebody could even view that without being a religious person. Don't you think that's a problem?
If I wasn't Catholic, I could have completely the same positions of moral consequentialism that I have now. It's just that would be applied universally instead of just on most issues.
What do you mean applied universally? Are you going back to the tax thing?
No.
Go.
If I had moral consequentialism, moral realism is the view that whatever is best for any given society is what should be done. So, for the most part, but there are certain areas where I believe in objective morality because of divine command theory and natural law. So in those areas, I revert back to my objective morality. In the other areas, I revert to.
Wait, you can't
my
revert
moral
back to your
consequentialism.
objective morality if I'm asking you to fathom a world where you can't use religion as a crux for generating your ethics.
No, that's what I'm saying. For the majority of things, even without the objective morality, like there's a lot of ways that my views would be exactly the same without objective morality.
But not your views on sex.
Well, my views on sex would be the same because of natural law.
So you think that people shouldn't be able to rape people then? Or you think that people should be able to rape people without sex being sacred?
Rape is one thing, but I'm just talking about in general about the roles of men and women in society. That would be more or less the same because natural law dictates it.
Gotcha. Okay, well, going back to the very, very original thing, I think that I've done an okay job at refuting all of the studies or evidence that you gave me about the genetic differences that explaining the variation in IQ between races. Do you disagree with that? Was there something that you wanted to talk about more in regards to any of those original studies or things you gave me to look up? Or
well, the only thing is, I give you a ton of evidence and a ton of studies that I think support it, and then you just come back to this argument of nihilistic argument about it being, oh, it's too complex for us to really know and stuff like that. So I don't know how anyone can convince you of this.
So
I don't think it's possible to.
Sure. So I'm disappointed that you said this because earlier you talked to me about intellectual integrity. Now it seems like you're abandoning that. You didn't present me with a ton of evidence. You presented me with 3 different things to look at. You presented me the idea that people immigrate with high IQs and then regress to IQs of their native countries. I couldn't find any evidence of this, and you tell me now that the only way I can find this is by Googling IQ numbers and doing it myself. The second thing you presented was the Minnesota adoption study, which you initially misrepresented quite large, and the researchers themselves dramatically disagree with your conclusions, and they've even responded in detail to the person that you cite that disagreed with their conclusions. And then 3, you brought up the Mongolians, who, from my reading, apparently are a culture that highly value education, and you're pointing to them as somebody that believes that IQ is this intrinsic thing. So these are the 3 pieces of evidence you gave me that you claim are a mountain of evidence, and none of them seem to hold up to any scrutiny. Do you disagree with any of these assertions?
Well, on point number 2, you're making it seem like the people who physically conducted the research are the end-all be-all of its interpretation, which I don't really understand because most of the time people who do the research are too involved to draw accurate conclusions.
Okay, I don't agree with that, but okay.
Well, in certain things, not like if it's something that's like not political or not like emotional or whatever, and they can step outside of the forest and see the trees, then it's not going to impact it. But like there are certain areas where that can
Sure.
happen.
So when you say certain areas, you've weasel worded your way out of all responsibility for that statement. But okay.
Well, no, but what I mean is, like, I could say, like, oh, well, James Watson, the man who invented the double helix DNA structure, he's the best scientist of all time, and he supports racialism and my views. So I'm correct, but you're basically just saying that because these two authors of this study refuted what the racialists said, and not even particularly well, in my opinion, that it's somehow that's the end all be all of that
So
study not being a piece of
the
evidence.
first argument you gave was a fallacious argument, appeal to authority, right? Just because somebody discovers DNA doesn't make them an authority on all human behavior. That's not true. I would never claim that. That's absolutely fallacious through and through. And secondly, you say that the researchers were inconvincing in providing environmental explanations for the differences between IQ. Do you disagree with the fact that they said in the study that a large majority of the black children were adopted at later ages, which could have had dramatic impacts? Or do you disagree with the assertion that a prenatal environment can have a very large impact on the IQ of a child, and that many of the black women in the study could have been subjected to bad prenatal environments due to the existence of segregation? Do you disagree with these assertions, or what exactly was unsatisfying about their explanations?
Well, what's really unsatisfying, it's not even that this particular study is
Mm-hmm.
some great study about DNA or whatever,
Then
about
why would you give me
heritability,
this
but
particular study to look at to prove your
well,
claims?
it's just one of the most well known, but there's tons of them like this. It's been replicated so many times, a
Okay, then why
ridiculous
not
amount
give
of
me a
times.
better why not give me another study that maybe is more recent that takes into account
Well,
the fact that maybe a
response.
study that doesn't draw black people that are literally living under segregation, maybe one that controls for adoption age a little bit better. Like, why not give me a different study then? Why give me one where the researchers themselves reject your conclusion? Wouldn't that make more sense if you were trying to prove your
Well,
point and give me a
I don't
totality of
know if
evidence?
researchers wouldn't reject the evidence, to be honest, even like if it was the most concrete thing possible. I don't know if any of these government funded researchers would come out and say, oh yeah, this is correct. So we can kind of forget about doing this diversity thing now, because it's going to destroy our nation. I don't think any of them would actually come out and do anything like that, even if it was founded, right?
Okay, and I don't think any scientist would actually admit that the world is flat because they'd be laughed out, even though I know for sure that the world is flat, and I've got a ton of evidence proving that the world is flat. No real scientist is going to come out and do it because the government will kill them. So now we're both taking the same position where we can't trust any authority because we think all authority on a topic is bad. So now we have to turn to absolute laymen, to YouTubers, or people posting on internet forums to derive scientific fact. I reject this. That this is the only way that we can go about this.
Well, that would. Do you think that if we were in a time where people who believe the Earth was round were killed, or societally shunned, that wouldn't have an impact on it? Like, do you think these scientists are so morally objective and they value objectivity so much that they would come out and say the truth regardless? Do you think that that's what would happen?
I mean, you do have scientists that publish pretty unpopular things. So, I mean, and I don't think we're murdering or killing scientists for publishing unpopular things, although there could be academic blowback for it, sure. But
Right,
it
like
seems strange to me that, like, it's so hard to find this evidence when you say you've presented a totality of it and it's so irrefutable. It seems strange that it would be so hard to find studies that support what you're saying then.
scientists who have said unpopular things and being shunned, James Watson and Richard Lynn, two very intelligent scientists who uh, drew some very, what I feel were correct conclusions, and they were completely shunned just because they were deemed as racist because they disagreed with the majority. So
Sure. So I guess I would invite you to present me more studies or something that I can look through, because all of the evidence that you've given me so far has failed quite dramatically when held up to scrutiny, unless I'm supposed to go through, read the data, reject the interpretation of the philosophers, or not the philosophers, of the researchers, and then reject their response to other people and take, I guess, what you want me to divine from the study. I would be interested to see other information, but as it stands right now, I don't think you've convinced anything or presented anything that's truly convincing the argument you set out to make. I think that's a pretty fair
well,
statement on my end.
I think the standard of evidence you're setting is so high that it would be impossible to convince you one way or the other that it was either
I'm
genetic or
literally
environmental.
asking for a very educated person that agrees with your opinion, that somebody that's wrote about it and agrees
What about
with your...
Richard Lynn? Richard Lynn agrees with my opinion.
Okay, but it seems that he stands at ends with the large amount of academic opinion on this topic. Like, can you find me more than like a single person? Like, if a body of literature supports something, like you can always find like one.
Do you
or
know
two,
how many books Richard Lynn wrote about this?
probably not as many as many books have been written against him by a number of other academics.
No. Do you think that science is governed by majority opinion? I don't really. You asked me to provide you someone who agrees with me, who wrote out intelligent things about this, who use science to prove it, and then I'm telling you, then you're saying, well, the majority disagrees, so that's not correct.
I guess, like, if the majority body of scientific literature is pointing towards a particular opinion, I guess, like, other opinions are interesting to consider, but I wouldn't consider that if you present, like, one person that says a different thing than the majority prevailing, body of literature states, I don't think that counts as a totality of evidence supporting your point of view.
Well, like,
I could go read more about Richard Lynn, I guess, to see more stuff about him, but this is the one person you've given me that seems to support your point of view. That
one sec, let me look something up. Okay, here are some other people that supported these views. J. Felipe Rushton, Arthur Jensen, Helmuth Nyborg. It says in this list that Charles Murray is included. Linda Gottfriedson.
Can you just throw me the list on a DM, and maybe I'll go look through them if I have time, but. Stephen
J. Gould. There's a bunch of people. If you just search up the name Richard Lynn, it'll come up to like the category. There's like a category for people that are like related to him, and I've like heard of a lot of these people before and like read a lot of their work, and they're basically in agreement with Lynn on a lot of these subjects.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying that there's no evidence to support it, or no one supports
what
this.
I'm saying is that
there are tons of people that do.
The prevailing body of work seems to dramatically disagree with the opinion that you're giving me, and I guess you can find a few people that are saying otherwise, but it seems like the prevailing opinion is that these people are probably wrong. So I guess I could jump ship and go to your side, but that seems like an irrational thing to do. Again, like, you can always find like a small number of people that believe in. I'm sure I could find some scientists that believe that climate change is 100% a complete and total hoax, and I'm sure I could find more than 2 or 3 that say it. But if the prevailing body of literature is pointing towards a certain conclusion, I think I would rather stay with like the majority of that direction than jump into like a more obscure.
Well, I think you're confusing two things here, because it's not the body of work that's pointing to one conclusion. It's it's how these people, these politically motivated people, interpret the body of work, right?
Well, that's what science is interpretation, right? That's when we're talking about body of work in literature, we're talking about their interpretation. It's not just data.
Right, but you realize like 1 out of 5 people in the social sciences are like self-identified Marxists, right? You realize that?
What is that? How is that relevant to any of this?
When 1/5 of the field is identifying as Marxist, you don't think that's an impact?
I don't know. Is it?
What I'm saying is it's a highly left-leaning field. The politics of people who enter this field are highly left-leaning. So do you think that their political views would not influence how they interpret things?
I mean, I would hope that you control for that using like peer review and whatnot. I would hope that doesn't happen as much. I mean, I'm sure academia in general is somewhat left-leaning, but you're talking about a pretty grand conspiracy here.
It's still conspiracy, though. It's not a conspiracy. It's just
well, you're saying there's a conspiracy all over, that people are misinterpreting this data intentionally to try to keep us from the truth that people are genetically predestined to a certain level of intelligence. Like,
right. But it's not that they're working together in some organized way to keep the truth down. It's just that they would try to
Well, but you made it sound like that earlier when you were talking about how
rationalize
they
their
would
views
shun
despite
people.
the data.
You said earlier that scientists would be shunned from communities and stuff if they said any of this. So you make it sound like people are working
That's
together.
objectively true, though.
Okay, so you're saying that there is a grand conspiracy where these
James
people...
Watson had to sell his DNA, or sell it. I don't know why I said that. His Nobel Prize, yeah, just to get enough money because he was totally rejected and thrown out of everything after he said that he is a hereditarian. So do you think that that's not a pretty hardcore level of shunning that one of the most famous scientists of all time, most important scientists of all time, literally is so poor now because no one will accept him that he has to sell a Nobel Prize just to survive? You don't think that's shunning someone?
So let me read some quotes from this guy because I just looked him up and I'm not sure why people hate him. He's been quoted to the Sunday Telegraph in 1997 as stating, "If you could find a gene which determines sexuality and a woman decides she doesn't want a homosexual child, well, let her." This says, on the issue of obesity, Watson has also been quoted as saying, "Whenever you interview fat people, you feel bad because you know you're never going to hire them." While speaking at a conference, he suggested a link between skin color and sex drive. And he said, "That's why you have Latin lovers. You've never heard of English lovers, only an English patient." He supported genetic screening and genetic engineering, arguing that stupidity is a disease. I mean, it seems like he's made quite a few controversial statements.
Well, controversy says nothing about truthfulness, right? There are differences in sexual drive between races. I'm pretty sure that's objectively proven that different races have different testosterone.
Can you go ahead and throw me some information on that? I would love to read that because I'm not going to take this at face value because you failed to provide any evidence supporting any other claims. I don't think.
What I'm saying, though, yes, I will provide evidence, but different races have different, not race, but I don't know if you want to use the word race, but different population groups have different testosterone levels, and testosterone is the primary indicator of sex drive.
I don't know if that's necessarily true, but okay.
Do a link after if you want one. But,
sure.
So, but do you think that that's not a pretty hardcore level of exclusion just for voicing contrary opinions that are probably even true?
I don't know. I would have to look at why he was so poor or rejected. I'm not sure. I don't know.
Well, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? I'm pretty sure that there were tons of articles about this around 2007, 2008, saying that he was rejected because he proposed hereditarian views on intelligence.
That might be true, but I mean, in reading this, it seems like he stated a ton of other controversial things, so that might not be the only thing that did it. I'm not sure.
But I'm almost certain that was the main thing, but regardless, this is just one anecdote in a much larger pattern that we can see with almost anyone who promotes these views. Richard Lynn has been shunned incredibly. Charles Murray has been shunned almost incredibly. And, Charles Murray is just a communitarian, slight conservative, and people try to make him out like he's Adolf Hitler and try to strip him of all his achievements just because he wrote the book The Bell Curve. It's ridiculous.
Sure, I think it is. It's ironic, though, that one of the reasons why he's so shunned is because people like you incorrectly cite his book as supporting your ideas when it doesn't sound like he's ever said anything as much in the book about him.
Well, once again, I'm almost certain that he has said that differences between groups in America can be nailed down to genetics.
All right, but he's completely abandoned that view and didn't say anything as much in the Sam Harris speech.
I remember him saying that it's not, or that you can't draw a absolute conclusion that it's genetics that causes the difference just because of a 0.75 heritability. But I don't think he said anything contrary to the hereditarian view in general.
Gotcha. All right. Well, is there anything else you want to talk about? Or I guess you can go ahead and send me that other stuff later, but I mean, I think I've gone through most of what you presented so far, and it's not been very convincing, so.
Well, is it not convincing to you that there's not a single country in the world with an African majority that is even close to the standards of any Western or Asian country?
No, these are intuitive things, and you can't trust your intuition when you're talking about such highly complex systems like this. No, I reject this.
I'm not saying it's like objectively like a proof of it, but like
no, but you're trying to say like, well, can't you see that black people all over are kind of dumb? So like, it must be genetic, right? Like that's a very, very ignorant argument. No, I reject that argument. You need more there. Because environment is very, 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 very complicated and has a very complicated impact on people in general. I mean, you can talk at length about colonialism or imperialism or tons of things that have disproportionately impacted different black groups of people around the world, that all disproportionately impact black groups of people around the world, and make very strong arguments on the other side. So I reject any type of intuitive interpretation of this and would only look at like very carefully done research.
Well, I reject your intuitive interpretation of the null hypothesis of blank slate egalitarianism.
I haven't given a null hypothesis. All I've said is that I'm not convinced of the genetic argument. There's nothing that we can do about the genetic argument, so let's continue to do what we can about fixing the environment. We have plenty of evidence that even you agree with the Flynn effect. There's plenty of evidence that increasing the environment or improving the environment of a person can increase their IQ or intelligence, so I would rather continue to go down that path. Maybe at some point genetic intelligence is proven, and in that case we can grapple with the idea then, but I don't accept this idea that intelligence cannot be, the variation of intelligence between groups cannot be explained whatsoever by genetics. I've never made that statement. I just said that right now the evidence for it doesn't exist, so I'll continue to function in a way where I purport policy that increases environment, because it doesn't seem like there's much we can do about genetics at this point in time.
Right, but once again, all you're going to be doing is destroying your society while you wait for that evidence.
I can do empirical tests to see if society is being destroyed. And since I'm not a hardcore Catholic like you, I haven't seen the evidence of the destruction of society that exists so far as a result of immigration.
Is it not a pretty destructive thing that the real wages have been falling in the U.S. for like the past 60 years? Is that not like a pretty destructive thing to you?
I mean, that's definitely a problem, but destruction of society, I'm not saying that society has wholeheartedly improved over the past 100 years in every single metric. I think in general it has. We do have problems with underemployment at the moment, and we do have problems with stagnation of real wages to some extent, but I think it would be crazy to try to pin that whole blame on immigration or the immigration of low IQ people. I think that we can enact different types of government or economic policy to counteract that doesn't involve eugenics.
Once again, you're not even understanding the use of the word eugenics, so...
That doesn't understand massively exporting certain groups of people based on what I consider to be arbitrary distinctions.
So even if intelligence wasn't a thing, but between the, even if intelligence wasn't genetic, or it wasn't the genetic differences between the races didn't explain the differences in intelligence, you would say that there's no difference between the races, or it's a meaningless distinction?
As it stands right now, there are differences between the races, but the distinction of race is important because it speaks to what we can do to control those differences, right? If I believe that right now black people are much less intelligent and much less educated and much less capable of earning in the job market compared to white people, right? I can accept that that is a reality. I wouldn't reject that. I would wholeheartedly agree. But the difference is that my solution would then be to figure out how to fix problems in that community using social policy rather than export that entire group of people to another continent, because I don't think that's a realistic solution.
So, but you do not think that it would be a realistic solution to stop to put a pause on immigration, so we're not bringing in 5 million people a year with an average IQ of 80?
I'm not sure what the average IQ of an immigrant is. You haven't linked me any study of this, and I haven't read any study of this, but I also haven't seen any studies showing that immigration is hurting the United States. It's usually the opposite when I read. Even from people that anti-immigration experts like to cite, they don't seem to hold this anti-immigration view that you do. The only people that I can find that have these anti-immigration views are people that are concerned about some imaginary idea of culture or white America. I don't really find people are making economic arguments against immigration. Again, I am an empiricist, so if the economic argument against immigration started to grow or evidence was mounting, then yeah, of course I would consider that. But at this point in time, I don't think that you can point to immigration as being destructive economically to the United States. Maybe morally or something like you would say, but I reject your morality, so that doesn't really concern me.
So you don't think flooding a country with that already has problems with its economy with low skilled workers is gonna be a bad thing to the native population of low skilled workers?
I mean, it really depends. I mean, there's a lot of interpretation and disagreement and argument in terms of what low-skilled labor does. I mean, if you're talking about how you want an economy to function, typically you want labor to be flowing from one market to another with as few restrictions as possible. Is there a possibility that some low-skill earners are hurt by low-skill immigrants coming into the country? Yeah, that's definitely possible. Some of them are hurt by it. Some of them are helped by it as complementary jobs open up. Everybody is helped by a reduction of prices. I mean, it's a game of trade-offs, right? It's a form of wealth redistribution to laborers and business owners, right? And if you need to supplement that with some kind of government policy to help the people that are getting fucked the most, then you do it. But you continue to grow the economy. You make the life better for the natives that are benefiting from lower prices. You make the life better for business owners that are benefiting from lower prices of labor. You make the lives of the immigrants that come here seeking economic opportunity better by giving them a better place to be in. And you grow the entire economy of the country as a whole while using policy to target the people that are the most worst impacted by it. That seems to be the prevailing thought of economists right now, even anti-immigration economists or economists that are cited as anti-immigration economists. So yeah, I think that low-skilled labor is vital to an economy, especially with low birth rates and people getting educated more today than ever.
Well, do you think that it's somehow impossible for low-skilled or for intelligent people to do lower-skilled labor? Because I know for a fact that it's impossible for lower skilled people to do high skilled labor.
In general, it seems like high skilled people are unwilling to do low skilled labor because they're hurting their earnings potential. It seems like most high skilled educated people, especially people that have made a financial investment in their education, wouldn't want to go after low skilled, low paying labor.
See, look, the problem with this is that you're building everything around a view of materialistic utility.
Yep, I am, because I reject whatever weird moral fascination you have with the world, and I'm all about the materialistic growth of the country, of the economy, of everything else. I'm not harboring any kind of protectionism over my culture or religion or something. But I think it's strange that you take this argument now, though, when you originally claimed that I was the one arguing from a state of emotion and not reason or logic. And I feel like my arguments are very reasonable and logical, but your counter to most of them seems to be, well, my religion states this, and I feel this way emotionally about how I think society should be ran because of sacred morals and whatnot. I think that you've kind of flipped that position now.
No, I haven't, because you can build logical arguments against the things that you're promoting, so that doesn't make any sense.
I don't think it's fair to say that you can build logical arguments off of a higher power that you have no evidence for. I reject that.
You can build logical evidence against materialism regardless of morality.
Oh, sure. You might be able to, but I don't think any part of the world right now functions that way, so I don't know how realistic those arguments would be. Can you think of any? Are there any countries right now that reject materialism and embrace, I guess, spirituality? I'm not sure.
Well, at some level, most countries do, don't they? Something like Sweden, they have tons of welfare programs and stuff. If they wanted just the materialistic gain to be maximized, they would get rid of all these welfare programs and just let the poor die, and then they could have their Xboxes and their flat screen TVs and their video games, right?
I mean, the argument for welfare, though, is that it leads to an increase in materialistic gain for the entire country. I don't know how successful Sweden would be if they let all of their low-skill people die. It would probably be bad overall for the country. Much the same way in the United States. We don't bring in low-skilled labor because it makes us feel better about ourselves, right? Low-skilled labor contributes to the overall economic health of a country. I reject that. I don't believe, and I don't think you believe that either, that Sweden would be doing better in a materialistic sense if it just let all of its poor people die. I don't think that would work realistically.
So wait, you're saying that social welfare programs are economic boon to a country?
Yeah, I think that's generally the argument that people try to make for them. Yeah, that economic welfare programs seek to bolster the opportunities available to poor people to lead to an overall greater economic boon. That for every dollar you spend, you get X amount of dollars back in investment. It's like an investment in your population.
I'm pretty sure most economists would disagree with that. But
In what sense? You think most economists think that the education available in the Nordic countries is inferior to the education available in the United States because we charge more money for it? What do you mean by that?
I don't think most economists would say that taxing the most productive members of society to provide for the worst members of society, economically speaking,
I think
would
almost
be
every
a good
economist
thing.
agrees with that. That's why, in general, we try to avoid regressive tax structures. And even in the United States, we aim for a progressive tax structure because typically more wealthy people spend a lesser percentage of their income on absolute vital necessities, right? So that's why we usually tax them at a little bit of a higher rate than poorer people that spend a higher percentage of their overall income on necessities. I mean, I've listened to a great deal, especially for other conversations of economic policy from economists, and I've never heard this idea that we shouldn't tax rich people a little bit more to help poor people. I've never heard that argument
Well,
before.
apparently you've never listened to anything from the Chicago or Austrian schools of economics, and if you believe that to be the case, you must only be listening to Keynesian economics then.
I guess so. So you're telling me that if I look up something, some economist or some speech from the Chicago School of Economics, that they're going to say things like everybody should be taxed at exactly the same rate, or that no
Yeah.
taxation or any kind of government spending can help society as a whole?
Well, the Chicago school is essentially believes that there should be almost no taxation, and it's essential. The Chicago school and the Austrian schools are essentially the foremost schools of economics, and they essentially synthesized with the Keynesian schools to create the modern establishment of economics in the I think this happened in the 1990s or so.
Okay, so it sounds like even these people believe that some level of taxation will probably benefit society.
I believe that the majority of them think is that taxation should be used to create a market structure. Like we need to tax people so that we can create a market structure, and then the market will produce the economic goods.
Okay, but we don't believe in like publicly funded roads or government or army or any kind of welfare.
It depends on the individual, I believe, because F.A. Hayek, who was an Austrian school economist, certainly believed in, I think he said he believed in healthcare and a small social safety net, but for pretty much everything else other than the essentials of life, he just wanted absolutely zero government regulations, almost no taxation, and no federal banks or federal reserves, nothing like that.
Gotcha. I mean, I guess if I saw any of this tried in the real world successfully, maybe I would be more keen to believe in its possibilities, but...
Well, it's already played a significant influence on mainstream economics. So, obviously there's some value to it, and to say that it hasn't been tried anywhere in the world when Augusto Pinochet's Chile took advice directly from the Austrian and Chicago schools of economics. I don't really.
So it seems
know
like
how you
right
can say
now
that it hasn't been tried.
it seems like right now there are countries with more progressive tax structures that are doing better than America in a number of ways, and America itself even has a more progressive tax structure. Can you think are there leading countries right now, like world player first world countries, that have a regressive tax structure that are doing well?
Well, economic success is malleable depending on your population, right? Like you can't compare like a 95% white country with an average IQ of like 108 to like the US with an average IQ of like 100, and like
If the
like a
average IQ
65% white population.
If the average IQ of these Nordic countries is so high, then why were they so stupid that they implemented welfare programs?
Intelligence doesn't really. I don't think I've ever claimed intelligence has anything to do with political views, right?
Oh, I guess.
Like Hong Kong has an average IQ of like 109, and they have pretty much completely free markets. So
Gotcha. All right. Are there any other topics you want to bring up?
No, I just actually can't believe that you've never heard people make arguments that welfare isn't a good thing for economy before.
No, I mean, I've heard people make those arguments before, but it seems when you look at how it plays out empirically, especially in countries that utilize it in Europe, it seems to work out in their favor, that they've used welfare in a lot of cases to boost access to education, and that shows on tests, that they boost access to healthcare, and that shows in things like infant mortality and survival rates for diseases, and that they use welfare to boost a lot of different things, and you can see empirical results that have shown these to be successful. I mean, I've heard a ton of ideas. I guess I haven't seen somebody cutting welfare to a whole bunch of people and then that turning out to be like a big economic boon to them. But I guess maybe it's happening somewhere and I just haven't heard of it yet. So I mean, I guess I can't believe either that I haven't found that country that cuts off all welfare to its poor people and is an economic boon.
Isn't it a general economic statement popular in economics that that you need to redistribute money to the most successful members of society because they're the ones that can stimulate the most economic growth?
Not necessarily. I mean, I guess maybe in some ways, but very rarely are there any hard and true economic statements that, like, you can do one thing all the time. I can't think of a single statement in economics that, like, applies that way.
A single statement in economics that you can say we always need to do this to ensure economic health?
Probably not. I don't think so.
You kinda confused him for...
Well, I think every school of economics has things that they would say like that, right? Like the Keynesian school would say, oh, we always need to have the central bank that lends out bonds and buys bonds so that we can stop recessions, and we need to manipulate the interest rates to curve out the cyclical shape of the economic growth and decline.
Yeah,
while
sure.
in Austrian would say we need to abolish the Federal Reserve because when you mess with interest rates, it sets them artificially low, which creates economic collapse.
Sure, you can say that. I was talking more in line with like general one-liner statements, right? The argument for or against a central bank, that's a very complicated economic concept. I was just talking about a single one-liner, like we should always redistribute wealth to the most successful people. Like a single statement like that, I think is pretty hard to. Like the existence of a central bank is a pretty complicated process, right? And can mean different things to depending on how you establish it and what its powers are and.
Right, but I just think in general you're overrepresenting truly how dismal the science of economics are. I don't think that
it's a very difficult science.
I think there are quite a few Well, yeah, it's a difficult science because mostly because it's a theory-based science, right? It's hard to draw anything from the empirical data, honestly.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, which is the exact same thing I would say about psychology or sociology or anthropology or whatever.
Like I can prax out in my head that like the minimum wage is a jobs killing thing. We need to abolish the minimum wage at the market set wage standards. But you could probably show me an example of somewhere where raising the minimum wage only slightly impacted jobs or didn't impact it at all. And then you could say, see, you're wrong. I proved you wrong. But really, if you have a logical, but truth has to exist on multiple axioms at the same time to be truth. So just point, and that's I think where the
truth
dismalness of the science.
The truth might be a little bit more complicated, though. Like, for instance, I can point to the United States minimum wage, and I can tell you right now that if you go and look up unemployment in the United States and you go and look up minimum wage in the United States, you will not see a correlation whatsoever. There is no relationship between these two graphs. Raising minimum wage in the United States has never caused an increase in unemployment. But that's not to say that a $25 minimum wage wouldn't do it. Like, it's entirely possible that a minimum wage can exist at certain price floors, that there are possibly ways that minimum wages can exist, or if it's not set too far from what the market would decide, it's possible that that maybe it can be an overall benefit to the economy. But again, like, this is what I'm saying, like in economics, every statement you make has like 15 fucking modifiers or can be augmented in 100 different ways, right? If you drop 20,000 immigrants into a city, is that going to hurt employment in that city? Well, I mean, it would seem like it in a vacuum, but what if other businesses move to the city to take advantage of all the cheap labor? What if other positions open up for managers for the natives there that are now able to work those jobs to manage all of that cheap labor? Now you've got natives benefiting and immigrants benefiting at the same time, when it seems like initially like it would be a bad idea. Like, not to say that that would necessarily happen, but in economics, everything is really fucking complicated, right?
No, right, it is. And you can make arguments for and against tons of things in economics, but the reason I was even bringing it up is because you were trying to say that that it's an agreed upon opinion that redistributing wealth to the worst spenders in society, the people that have the worst self-control, the lowest IQ, that's a boon to society, right? So that's why I was bringing up that
Oh, sure, in general, but that's not the only type of
that plenty of
welfare.
people disagree.
That's not the only type of welfare that can exist, though. I mean, education spending is a type of it is welfare, really, right? If we talk about education subsidization, rich people don't need money for school. It's typically poor people, so that's a type of welfare. If we talk about programs that provide healthcare or screening, or how about birth control for women, right? This is something that is a welfare program to provide free birth control for women in poverty, but this is something that overall, definitely benefits society. Money that you spend on the reduction of out of wedlock birth rates and whatnot are definitely a boon to society as a whole. So I mean, you can make arguments, like pretty solid ones or almost irrefutable ones, in terms of you can distribute some money to poor people in certain ways that will benefit all of society as a whole, more so than not doing it. But I don't know. But you might be
Right.
really
Well,
morally opposed to birth control. So
well, yeah, I am morally opposed to birth control, but that's not where I'm going to draw argument against. So what I would say about that is, yes, in our current situation, it is a boon to society to distribute birth control because it suppresses the birth rates of the lowest intelligent people. But in my ideal society, no, birth control would be banned because there would be no sex outside of marriage anyway.
sure, but I mean, it's not really
But
worth talking about that policy because we're
no,
never
I
going
know,
to exist in that society, right?
yeah, I know, but college education college education is mostly the rich and the poor paying for the middle class to go to college, right? That's what free college education is, right?
Yeah, to some extent, but you hope to funnel more lower class people into more successful education systems. That should be a goal of a good welfare program, right?
Right, but the lowest intelligence people are the ones who are the most likely to be poor anyway, so it's highly unlikely that they're going to be able to go to college in the first place.
Maybe, except I mean, I mean, I've seen studies. I have one right on hand that I can show you that correlates even low IQ at childbirth increasing as you go through Morse college. Regardless of the starting age of the child, that you can see IQ increases through education. So I don't think that you can make the argument that every single person that isn't in school right now because of their environment wouldn't be there anyway because of their genetics. I think that argument is very fallacious.
I agree that's not an absolute thing. People with lower intelligence can go to college, and that intelligence can increase or whatever. But in general, that type of welfare program isn't really akin. Giving the middle class free education isn't really akin in my mind to just taking money from the richest people by imposing a 50% tax rate to give to Shaniqua and Tyrone to go buy their food stamps and their 8-ounce bottles of beer. I don't really see those two things as at all equivalent.
I mean, when you make it sound as absurd as possible, probably not. But if you do studies and you find out that populations of people are much less likely to resort to crime or thievery or something if they have access to a certain level of food, you might be able to make the argument that taxing Jonathan Smith for some money to give to Tyrone and Shaniqua so that they can go to the grocery store and get food might be an overall boon to the economy because you're not spending as much money on corrections, locking these people up or putting them in prison or whatever. That's just one example.
Actually, according to Keynesian economic theory, we should just make these people as poor as possible, and that way they'll go out and they'll destroy a bunch of stuff. And when they destroy stuff, it'll create an economic boon because once something is destroyed, you have to hire people to fix it. So
this is called the broken window fallacy, and nobody, not even a Keynesian, sincerely believes in this because whatever money you spend fixing that broken window is money that could have been spent in other places. This is a fallacious argument that nobody sincerely believes.
Believe it actually. So
okay, I mean,
he literally says that we need. He literally has said that we need to build Death Stars and smash everything and burn cities to the ground with giant Godzillas to create jobs to it's ridiculous. He didn't say it in exactly that, but that's his general but that's something he generally does promote is destruction creates economic boon, and like we can just put people to work digging ditches and it'll create an economic boon and stuff like that.
Okay, well, I guess I haven't heard that before. I mean, to some extent, destruction can create economic boon, I guess, depending on how you look at it. I don't know the context of that statement. I mean, World War II created a large boon for a lot of countries, but
World War II created a boon for a country?
For the United States, we manufactured a fuck ton of shit. Germany came back pretty fucking hard. Japan closed up all of its borders, and with the hope the United States came back pretty fucking hard.
Germany's economy was way better before the war, and it was tanking during the war. And the U.S.'s economy didn't really improve until the central planning during the war ended.
Wait, Germany's post-World War I economy was better than Germany's economy right now?
No. I thought you were talking about like World War II itself was good for the.
Oh no, I'm just saying that the destruction afterwards like created a lot of I guess like economic opportunity, but right, in terms of like manufacturing and construction and all of that. But I mean, I don't think that it's necessarily good to blow places up to generate right more economic activity.
Yeah, no, I can see that in certain situations. After something is destroyed, it could create a better economy afterwards, and you have to rebuild it. I don't doubt that.
Sure,
but,
I think there are some cities in the United States, was it Chicago, that had a ton of fucking fires that fucked up a lot of shit, but what they were able to build afterwards was a lot more organized and better. I think that was Chicago. I don't have a great history of that, but
yeah, I don't know. I'm sure that is probably true.
All right, do you have any other final thoughts? Are we good?
I don't even know what we're talking about at this point, honestly. We disagreed on our main subject, and I don't think we're ever going to agree until we get like genome mapping. I don't think you would consider taking a position one way or the other, would you?
It would be really, really hard. But if enough convincing studies came out, then I would probably, I would probably move over. I mean, I want to be in wherever the most evidence is. Like, environment is incredibly fucking complicated, but genetics are incredibly fucking complicated as well. So,
right. Well, I think within 10 or 15 years, we will have the full genome mapping. Charles Murray has said as much himself. So, I think it'll pretty much be a settled thing in a few years.
Sure thing. Well, we'll reconvene then, and we'll see what the research says.
yeah, we can reconvene in 10 years from now.
Sure. All right. Have fun, buddy.
All right, bye.
All right, well, there we go. We reconvened. I did my reading. I think we did an okay job refuting everything that he linked us initially, right? I don't think he had much to fall back on at the end of